And I probably turn off the ice skating here.
Is that still on?
We won curling.
Yes.
We won curling. US beat Sweden for the
Oh,
gold.
you're talking to the people's champ, right?
No.
Like midnight. Midnight. Yeah, right.
Me and Tony work at the same place, and there was like this. Curling is like a big thing down in Cape Cod, and so they had a media day at one of the curling clubs to, drum up exposure and shit like that. And so we competed in this like amateur would be really given credit that isn't due, because it was everybody's first time on the ice, but
Nuga is what you call it. A nuga. Nugu. Yeah. Nugu. Gotta be careful how to pronounce that. Nugu.
Clip that.
We could edit some of the rougher takes of that statement.
Sorry. Yeah, please. There's a Korean pronoun that is nega, and so a lot of times when like a Korean artist will perform in America, there's this like people are. Never mind. Off topic. But this is a good segue to the music. Is all I can't say foreign because it's probably heard all over the world, but non-American.
Yeah, we had a pretty diverse episode, but before we jump into all of that, this is Music Talk, riffandrock.com. Kris is here, and I always point to my left every time I introduce Kris, even though he is not in the room. But Kris,
I'm not. And I don't want to say where you're. I don't want to talk about the top secret area that you're recording from, but I can confirm that I'm not in the same room as you.
I'm pointing to my washer and dryer at the moment.
There's a certain echo to your voice, Kris. Does that mean anything in particular?
Well, we were just talking about Jimmy Page before, so I'm going to say it's the ghost of Jimly Page beefing up my voice.
I thought you were like in the bathroom or something.
No, but I am.
Okay. I've turned off my video because, honestly, really, I could turn it back.
And then joining us today we have Cotton Park. Cotton, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks. How are you?
I'm doing great. So, Kris, this was your harebrained idea. Why don't you walk us through the theme of today's episode?
Am I going to get slammed at the top of every one of these episodes?
Harebrained doesn't mean bad.
Harebrained?
Harebrained.
It's pretty bad.
At least it wasn't hair-lipped.
Because here's how I'm hearing this. It either means that, like, the idea is so bad that it means that, like, my body has, like, turned against me, my hair is growing into my brain, affecting the brain activity, or I have the brain of a rabbit. It's not good. Oh. It's not a good look.
Well, I will say, though, as you explained it, I got the sense that me and Cotton took one interpretation of this, and you took a totally different one, but we'll get there in a second. Walk us through what today's theme is.
I just want to confirm to everyone that my hair is not growing into my brain.
And your brain is not consisting of hair.
No, it is not.
If I wasn't on this call, I'd be Googling that right now. What's the origin of that phrase? Hair brain. I know what a hair shirt is. I know what hair lipped means.
We're actually going to be collaborating with Ira Glass on a new podcast where we examine
this hairy life.
Yes, this hairy life. So this episode is we talk about fun albums a lot on this show, and very often the albums aren't exactly fun, like last we's Melt Banana. And so today we're going to be talking about some actually fun albums. People normally go through their lives listening to one kind of music, and every now and then you got to hit the reset button. You got to take a spoonful of sorbet after a nice beef tenderloin dinner. And so that's what this is. These are refreshing albums, and yeah, that's the intro, baby.
And if I remember, you kind of pitched it as like these are your comfort albums. These are the ones you go back to. You just listen to a 3-hour live Magma performance, and then all of a sudden you're going, man, I need to cool off with something nice and calming.
This is the cold shower and cigarette after.
Although My selection is kind of the opposite. I listen to very calming, upbeat, happy music all the time. I'm more into electronic music, especially of Asian descent. And this is an old. My album is a very old favorite of mine, which I still like when I just need to. Yeah, I guess comfort is a good way of saying it because it's a very comfortable record to me. It's one of my favorite records from my early 20s and 30s, I guess.
So why don't you walk us through since you talked about started yours off? Why don't you introduce us to the album you brought us today?
I did not know this at the time, but and as I mentioned to Chris off camera or off mic, this was an NME album of the year or won some award, I forget, but it's an album called Copper Blue by a power trio called Sugar. And what's most notable about Sugar really is the songwriter and vocalist, who is Bob Mould. And if you're familiar with Bob Mould, he is a legendary songwriter from Minnesota who was one of the members of Husker Du, who were a seminal. I wouldn't say thrash, but they're in that era, in that sort of space.
Certainly one of SST's better bands, other than Black Flag.
Absolutely. And Bob Mould has gone on to a solo career, and I almost think of Sugar as a Bob Mould solo album because it's very similar. He's an amazing songwriter who I like almost everything he does, even if I don't actually listen to it or like it. I like the way he goes about his business, and I like his grinding voice, and I like so it's a lot different than my musical taste has evolved over the years, and as I've said to Chris before, as you get older, I firmly believe that you stop hating things. And so what would have been a guilty pleasure to me when I was back in the day when I would be playing Bob Mould and then sneaking like a PM Dawn record when nobody was looking, or Kathy Dennis or some disco record,
Karen Carpenter.
Karen Carpenter, I am not. That's not a guilty pleasure. I have no qualms about. I have no qualms about. I'm not a. I love her voice, but not a Carpenter's fan. But I have some that we work with that thinks I am a Carpenter's fan for some reason, and she'll just never get it out of her brain. So nowadays I listen to a lot of electronic. I listen to a lot of Korean and Japanese, like groups like Perfume. I don't know if you're familiar with that. And so this, or like techno swing. I'm very big fan of Parab Stellar, who is a Hungarian, makes amazing albums with samples from Benny Goodman and Muddy Waters and all kinds of different blues and swing artists. And I like acid jazz too. I listen to a lot of acid jazz, and I also listen to a lot of K-pop, believe it or not. So and also KR&B, which is actually really going to be a real thing because all the artists and songwriters that came to Seoul to make K-pop are now kind of branching out and making really, really good, solid R&B records. So I like stuff that's kind of makes you dance. And so this was sort of an album that I go back to from time to time just to reset, And so when Chris said, well, what's your palate cleanser? I said, oh, gosh, it's got to be Bob Mould or, some old Talking Heads or something like that. So, yeah, the B-52s is another one. Those are the records that I kind of cut my teeth on in my early 20s. Mm-hmm. So. Yes, I'm old. So, yeah.
Chris, what did you think of this album?
I thought it was good. It sort of, it's like a blanket of FM rock from the 90s, from the early 90s.
Yes.
The first track, for instance, I got strong vibes of. It sort of reminded me of L7. They're I guess you would, I don't know. What is the qualification for Riot Girl? If you're playing punk music and it's all women, does that automatically make you Riot Girl, or is there some like point of demarcation where like you become Riot Girl?
I think it's actually a fashion thing.
Okay, I wasn't sure, but yeah. So you got a little bit there. There's some stuff on here that reminds me of REM. The use of the jangly guitars,
Yep.
And such, and you can sort of, if you are a fan of Husker Du, you can sort of see a natural progression here, where, you know, as Tony said, Husker Du has more of a thrashy vibe. It's a little bit more aggressive and active, but it still has like the same instrumentation. It's very minimal. There's no keyboards. There's going to be an acoustic guitar in the background there for rhythm shit. And overall, I would say it was a good listen. It was a nice listen. What did you think, Alex?
So, preface a couple things. Number one, I actually really appreciate you bringing this album to my attention for the sheer purpose of, in my band's practice space, there was always a big poster that the guitarist or our bassist had that said "Sugar, file under easy listening," and I didn't even know what this was.
Yes.
I'm like, oh, that's
another album of theirs, yeah.
And so today I'm like, well, when this album got introduced to me, that hey, we're gonna be listening to this album by a band called Sugar, I'm like, oh, this is what that is. So there's that reassurance of I'm connecting dots. I'm learning things.
And it's not what you think either, because Sugar, you might think of it being very pop.
Yes.
Although there are some pop, there's some pop compositions, like If I Can Read Your Mind, or If I Can't Change Your Mind, and some of the other harder songs still have and I think that's true of Husker Du, or I actually call them Husker Du. I think that's true of Husker Du. They were very, very, hard, but they had a melodic sort of tendency to them that kind of separated from the pack at SST.
I mean, to be fair, Zen Arcade's last track was just 14 minutes of thrashing on one riff.
Yeah,
it's SST. You can get away with that shit. You gotta, Like, I have a great compilation that maybe someday we'll do if I can figure out an episode to do it on. But it's all instrumental stuff from SST, which is really interesting because it gives you a very different side from like the Greg Ginn led punk groups that mostly dominated it.
Right. So that's the first point. Then the second point, and this is no fault of Cotton's. This is one of my least liked genres in music as a whole, is 90s alt rock music.
Ooh.
It is.
No, that's okay.
You can put like a couple,
I don't listen to it anymore, so yeah, I mean,
you can put a compilation of 20 different bands on like 20 different songs from 20 different bands on a CD, and I probably would not be able to differentiate any of it. I mean, I think the most salient example was someone gave me PJ Harvey's Rid of Me, which is sort of like an allegedly seminal 90s album, and it wasn't until track 5 where I actually found a song I enjoyed. It was just like the same trudgy three-chord riffs that are tuned to drop D. So with that,
I don't necessarily disagree with you. So, I mean, while I love this album, but I think as far as the genre itself, yeah, there's only a few.
There's a few standout examples of like this genre of music done well. One is the Breeders. The Breeders were one of the few bands that actually really took the idea of this kind of music and expanded on it. And coincidentally enough, I would give this album a pass on that. In that, yes, I listened to this entire album a couple times, and the first time I listened to it, I was like, I know I've heard this album, and I haven't, but I was so convinced I had because like how all these songs sound like a lot of those other songs. Like, I'm sure there's a Smashing Pumpkins song that has the same chords, or there's an REM song that has the same chords, or L7, or any of those bands from that era that just had this very similar sound. This was a very, very popular sound. And a lot of them are just a giant ball of fuzzy, detuned guitar nonsense that I cannot stand for the life of me. Like, people tell me My Bloody Valentine's Loveless is high art, and I'm like, this is drudge.
No, I totally agree with you, but I don't.
But this one,
I'm biting my lower lip at the My Bloody Valentine comment.
But to this album's credit,
there's a lot of harsh truth. It's a harsh truth. You can't argue with it.
I'll defend Bob Mould as a songwriter to the life of me because of the passion and the personality and the intensity that he puts in the and I'm not big on the lyrics, quite frankly, but
the lyrics are schlock, but the music itself, and I'm not an expert on Bob Mould by any means, but I know a decent amount of Husker Du. I've heard a couple solo albums. This is my first Sugar album, and overall, I think this had a good combination of just some unique musical characteristics and some extra little more leaning on the pop side of sensibility that made these songs a little bit more vibrant, a little bit more our favorite word on Riff and Rock, fun. There's a lot of fun in this album in the sense that it's not as drudgy as some of those other '90s examples are that I'm bringing up. There's a levity to it. So you have a song like Hoover Dam, which is it's just silly. It's a silly schlocky little '90s.
That intro is really cool though.
It is, and that's the thing is that this album has sprinkled little moments that keep the songs fresh and keep the songs interesting. It's there might be that chuggy riff, but then there's a nice little guitar solo that's that's elevates it. There's some fun vocal play. There's a couple moments I think where there's some synthesizer or keyboards sort of peppered in the background too. So there's always
mostly Hoover Dam.
Yeah, but there's always just enough to keep this album from falling too off the rails into '90s alt rock drudgery and just kind of keeps it floating. And I think that's a real testament to this album. And yeah, this is the kind of thing you could just put on in the background. You could go clean your house, you could go hang out with friends, and it's inoffensive. You don't need to like really sit and open the lyric book and study all the meaning. It's just you put it on and it's a nice enjoyable 45-minute romp.
This kind of reminds me of discussions that we've sort of circled around with talking about Anti-Mask or the new Drive-In album or something like that, where
Yes.
music like this really isn't getting made anymore. Like, just very pleasant. Like, it's good enough for people who are into something a little bit more dense, and it's good enough for people who like their shit a little bit lighter. There's no, like, middle-of-the-road, high-quality albums like this anymore.
No,
which is a real shame.
And one other thing I wanted to mention to this album's credit, this album came out in '92, which is sort of when the CD is really on its big rise. The tape is dying, the CD is exploding, and a lot of
It originally came out on Ryko disc.
Ooh.
Oh, yeah. They are long gone.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
But so what happened, and I would love to do an episode on this, is in this time period from like around 92 to around the early 2000s, albums, because you could put 75 minutes worth of music, were getting longer. A lot of old albums are 45 minutes because it's within the confines of a vinyl, and most record companies didn't want to pay you to put out a double, So you got to put out a 45-minute album, that's it. Then the CD came out, and you're going to notice a lot of 90s albums are 75 minutes, whether they need to be or not. It's just, we could put more shit on here, so we put more shit on here. And that's often what sank this genre of music is, instead of having a nice, succinct 45 minutes that comes in, does a good job, and leaves, it's like, here's another 15 songs that you don't fucking care about. And so this has a nice brevity and levity, which keeps it...
Ooh.
It keeps it alive versus a lot of other acts at the same time. They're like, oh, we can add another 45 minutes? We shouldn't, but we're going to.
Yeah, like that's especially
I think
the rap in the metal albums. I feel like do that a lot, where it's like 75 minutes, and it's like, really? We gotta stay on this train for another 25 minutes.
Oh, and that's always been my biggest critique of 90s hip hop is that, like, I know a key example is The Roots' Illadelph Half-Life is lauded as a seminal hip hop album. It is good, but it is chronically too long, and it overstays its welcome. It's just so crammed with content that you just can't pull out the good stuff because you're suffocated by the length of it. And especially if it's not like a ridiculous prog act where it's these long songs or whatever, it's just a bunch of 3-minute songs. Eventually you're just lost in it.
Yeah, I mean, you're signing up for it in that situation.
You are enlisting.
I'm an M83 fan, and as much as I love Hurry Up We're Dreaming, it's exactly what the point you're making is that there was a discipline which I think you correctly say was enforced by the vinyl limit. But it gave you it's like one of my friends who writes book reviews. She confided to me and she said, Tony, it's amazing how many people just need an editor. In other words, like you said, you need to have that concise, defining collection, and there's a lot of stuff that doesn't need to be in there, and so anyway, but I find that that's a particularly Western thing as well. I think there's a little bit more discipline in Eastern music production.
Mm-hmm. you're gonna probably be more of an expert on me, but and I would agree that, and I think it kind of comes through too that, with, you mentioned Talking Heads, one of my favorite albums is Remain in Light, and when they put out the CD version of it later on, there's those bonus tracks. You can hear like, oh, there's some other stuff that was kind of cool, but they had to go, we only have this much time, we can't put this on the album, so it got cut. And you can sit there and go, well, it would have been great if it's on there, but at the same time, that 45 minutes that existed on the vinyl was pretty much the best 45 minutes they were gonna press on a vinyl. You know what I mean? So instead of being like, we could just do, it's that I think there's a special, how would I put it? I think something really special comes out of art when there's a limitation on it. When you're like, this film only has this budget, or you can only put this much music on the album, or your book can only be this long, and it forces you to really condense the creative energy into sort of a more of a laser focused presentation, as opposed to, I can do whatever I want, now I don't know what to do.
It's a cliche, but it's true.
Every single painter has that exact issue, because they're painting on a canvas that is a certain size. And while some people can create these massive you're limited, and unless you're doing the Sistine Chapel, basically, maybe that's a poor analogy, but
no, but it's fair. That's fair, and I think
it's funny. Like, how did pop songs become 3.5 minutes, no more, no less? Give or take 5 or 6 seconds.
Right.
How did that happen?
There's
no reason for it, but there must be, because that's the accepted length. So it's almost like I feel like that's an acceptable length for an album is 45 minutes.
So obviously,
by the way, there's a deluxe version of this that I found this morning and never knew existed. And as you said, just like you were saying, it has 5 deluxe songs on it that I never heard before, and I was almost like, kind of disappointed.
Because you knew there was. But overall, like I said, I liked it. There's some really fun songs. Changes was a preferred one. Fortune Teller, Slick, a couple things that were like that I could forget. But overall, I think this is a good. If you were to explain to a Generation Zer what happened in the '90s, you could sit them down and give them this album, hand them a Surge, and be like, "Let me tell you a little bit about George Herbert Walker Bush."
Oh man.
I think Good Idea is a very fun song, because it starts out kind of angry, but when you listen to it, it's very tongue-in-cheek, and the slashy guitar in the chorus is, I don't know, it matches the lyrical content, and it's like got this sort of tongue-in-cheekness to it that I like a lot. And I like the whole album, so hey, I recommend it.
I do too. I think it's really worth your time. And as an example of sort of that overarching trend in '90s sort of grunge alt rock, this is a solid example, and it stands out. And earlier in that trend of music, so I think it's not as confined to the tropes that would ultimately drown it a few years later.
Yeah.
And the difference between Sugar and Bob Mould's solo stuff, which is also phenomenal, is that Bob Mould's solo, like Workbook and Black Sheets of Rain, is an amazing album, but it's more rangy. He tries more things, whereas Copper Blue kind of sticks to a formula. Although, If I Can Change Your Mind is a little different. It's got the acoustic guitar in it, and Hoover Dam has the synthesizers. It sticks to the same kind of format, and I think it gives you what you want. It's like, what you're going to get, you got it.
Right, absolutely. But so keeping in a similar trend, another trio, this was my selection, a release from 2005, Sambomaster's I'm going to kill this, so my apologies. Sambomaster wa Kimi ni Katari Kakeru. As you can guess, not an English band. These guys are from Japan. And full disclosure, I initially discovered these guys. The second song of this album, Seishun Kyoso Kyoku, was an opening for Naruto. And in high school,
I was going to say, I'd heard it before.
Yeah.
And I was going to ask you about that. Go ahead.
That's how I found it. Jesus Christ, I was like a sophomore in high school. So I heard that song and I'm like, this song's great. And a friend of mine who used to really troll the IRC world found a bunch of these albums on IRC, and he's like, here you go. And turned out that, there was that little minute 30 anime opening. I'm like, hey, that's cool. Turns out then there's a whole 12 track album that's, I think, an absolute treat, and a larger discography of similar sounding albums, but they're all really well done. I'll say real quick before I hand it over for your guys to dissect. The thing I really, really like about Sambomaster, number one, is the passion. The singer...
is he Sambomaster? Is he Master Sambo?
Sambomaster allegedly is based off the name of... There's a Russian style of martial arts or something like this called Sambo.
Oh my god.
And so they're the masters of Sambo. And so you have... Takashi Yamaguchi, the singer, and... He just everything is over the top passion with him. I mean, in the middle of the song, he just stops singing. He's just screaming whatever he's screaming. I have no idea. He's just sharing his thoughts and feelings. So there's always this drive, this energy. That and the musicianship itself is amazing. Yes, these are little 3-4 minute rock songs, very similar in the vein of the kind of music that was being produced back then, but the drummer is always putting together these excellent little fills in between in the songs. The guitar parts are actually really well done. The bass is varied. So, and this is something, as a fan of a lot of Japanese rock and roll music, I always, and I could be wrong, maybe I'm not listening to everything that's out there, but they have a tendency to emphasize talent a little bit more. So even if it's a rock song that you could just hit 3 chords, they're like, no, we're going to have these fills, we're going to have these leads. It's going to be sort of a little bit more efforts put involved into it. And I always appreciate that, because it makes what could be just a sort of an okay song, it elevates it, because there's all these little things that kind of catch your ear or catch your attention, especially as someone who produces music himself. But Chris, Cotton, what did you think of Sambomaster wa Kimi ni Katari Kakeru?
Well, I just want to first off say that I'm going to eschew any martial arts references to this name, and I'm just going to imagine that they got this name from some kind of a home appliance that's sold in Japan called the Sambomaster, which makes a perfect bowl of sambo for you and your family. This album is interesting.
Could be worse.
It could definitely
be worse. There are worse analogies you could make, but go ahead. Yes, I'll take it.
So this album, I would say it is very similar to Sugar in that it sort of gives me that same alt rock, golden age of alt rock, quote unquote, feel to it. Just from the Japanese perspective. The first 4 tracks I liked, I was on board, and then the horn section came in with track 5, and that pushed it. That pushed it a little bit overboard for me at that point. I was like, oh boy, I know that there's an AMV that exists of this song. I don't even have to look it up for Yorugo Aketara. And also the next track, I like how it's Yokubu Rock, because it's all capital letters. But yeah, the passion is high. Emotions are high on this album. It's great. It's very Japanese. As you said, it's a little bit more theatrical, a little bit more showy. It's very shiny. Makes me think of Shibuya with all the flashing lights and shit. Tony, what'd you think?
Well, I agree with your. I don't think it could. One thing I've learned is music's music, and but Japanese do have exactly what you're saying. They do have a propensity to highlight talent, almost to a fault, I think. And so, for example, whereas we might have, and again, I listen to a lot of pop music, so I'm just going to throw that out there, and you can hate it if you want. But we have someone like Fifth Harmony. Korea has all kinds of pop groups, and then even Japanese pop groups, like for example, Momoira Clover Z. The musicianship is amazing. Or even something like Baby Metal, for example. Baby Metal has one of the most amazing bands you've ever heard in your life. Baby Metal is kawaii metal, which is cute metal, which is only could come from Japan. And so
I always thought it was pronounced kawaii. I didn't know it was pronounced.
What? I don't even really know, nor do I care.
Kawaii sounds more legit than kawaii.
Yeah, well,
so we'll go with that.
Kawaii sounds like a Hawaiian island.
Exactly. But it's
so. So my again, my first introduction to Japanese music was Perfume, and Perfume is completely 100% computer, digital, electronic. But I've ventured into other things, and I it's kind of funny. I listen to a lot of Scandal. I listen to a lot of Bandmade. For some reason, I love women singers. I love women. I just have maybe I don't know what it is, but I always have. Ever since I was in my 20s. But this was very different. The Kawi rock and there's another format. I forget what it's called at the time. It's very tight and very very succinct and no note wasted. There's a restraint to it, but at the same time, there's an emphasis on how many notes you can, how good you are.
Are you talking about like math rock?
Maybe. But anyway, so what this? I'm sorry, that was a long intro. I tend to ramble, but did Kris warn you? The album itself is it actually kind of reminded me a little bit of Sugar, in the sense it was a power trio. It was very emotional. I liked it actually. I liked it a lot. This is something I would certainly listen to. But it's sort of in my comfort zone. I thought they show a lot of range. Some of the songs, like Kris was mentioning the horns. That actually kind of reminded me of old Chicago. There was sort of a timelessness to this album.
You know what? I'm glad that you mentioned that, because I thought the exact same thing and I totally forgot about it.
And you know what? Honestly, there's nothing wrong with that, because I think Chicago really staked a claim that is really underrated. They were really the first rock and roll band to incorporate a really good horn section, and I thought the guitar work was really rangy. Like there was some jazz chords in there, some strict rock and roll chords. I love the fact that he could go from sort of a raspy sort of whisper to a really strident scream, even though but everything was melodic. I don't know. I was pleasantly surprised. I shouldn't say pleasantly surprised, but because again, I love Asian music in general, so I liked it.
Yeah, I will say that my other I can't remember what other songs had horn sections and which ones didn't, but I remember that was the first one and that I didn't like it. But there were other instances where it came on the album and it was a little bit more restrained. Like it's definitely intense in that first one. It's a real spicy meatball, as they say. But my other issue is there are three. Pretty much immediately after it, there are three more tame songs. Almost, I guess you would call them a ballad or ballads. And I wasn't sold. I wasn't into it. And I don't know if it was just because there were three in a row or just because they were ballads to begin with. But I thought the placement of that was weird, to just have this, all this energy surrounding this 1-3-track block where it's just like everything, crawls, slows down to a crawl.
There's two criticisms I have of this album, despite having listened to it for over a decade. And one is what you said. A lot of albums will sort of have this tendency to, have two intense songs, and the third one's mellow, then the fourth one's a little bit more, there's sort of a wax and wane of the energy to kind of keep you hooked along. And so the trajectory, like overall, the mean level of intensity is consistent through the album. This one has like a bit of a J where it starts really intense, or how would I put it? It starts off super intense, then it really drops in the middle of the album, and then it comes back up just a little bit at the end. So
yeah, it's like a middle ground.
Yeah, like a letter N that hasn't quite been finished drawing. You're like, it peaks, it goes down, and then there's a little bip at the end. So I think that's fair. The other criticism I had, and I was curious if you guys were to notice it, there's a couple songs that sound a lot like the other songs. So Seishin.
Yeah, there was a little.
There's a little
sameness.
There's a couple moments where I'm like, I feel like we are really too close to plagiarizing ourselves. So the example I always come up with is Shumatsu Soul sounds suspiciously like Seishun Kyoso Kyoko.
I was just thinking of that.
Right, where I'm like, it's the same song, just you probably jammed it out when you wrote this album. You jammed it out both ways. You went, both are good. Let's put both of them in the album. Wait, now they're too similar. Tweak a few things, and now it's a different song, even though it sounds like the same exact song if you were to speed one up, slow one down. So there's a couple moments like that where it feels like the creative well ran a little dry, but to the credit of the songs, they're still really well done songs. Is just
they are.
Putting both of them on the same album is a bit of a risky move because it's gonna come out. It's gonna be much more apparent as opposed if you were to take one, put it on a different album. And these guys released a block of albums in a very short amount of time. There was 3-4 albums in a row within like a 3-4 year span. So you had the opportunity to kind of play around with some stuff, and they didn't, which was a little odd to me. But other than that, I mean, I've listened to all their other work. I tend to really dig it. Though funny enough, based on what we were talking about earlier, the one album I'm not as big of a fan of is the one that's an hour and 18 minutes long. All the other ones are around 45 to 50 minutes. Yeah. That's the one that I'm like, oh my God, it's going.
I could not do double length of this. I could not.
No.
And I did enjoy it. You know, same with the Sugar one. Like I would say my palate was cleansed. So check.
I will say this: I enjoyed the mid tempo and the ballads. I think the thing here's the thing I like, and I think it's one thing that I think is important. This is why I like Bob Mould so much. Is that they have a charisma that comes through.
Yeah, they definitely do.
I thought the production was a little, it wasn't as tight as what I'm used to, and it's a lot rougher than like a lot of other Japanese metal bands and rock bands. But I think that's sort of a maybe because it came out earlier than than some of the groups I listen to, but it had a kind of a roughness to it, like a rough kind of almost a sloppiness to it, like and I like that because it was like I think people underestimate the power of charisma. It's the thing you can't define, the intangible. And I'm really bad with Japanese names. I really am. I can't even remember Perfume's songwriter's name, and I listened to Perfume. I've been listening to Perfume for 5 years. What is his name? You had it earlier. The lead singer and the guitar player. He just has this passion that just comes through and just sells you.
I agree, but like it's the combination of the passion and the technical prowess. Because I kind of you mentioned that charisma is underrated, and I agree. But at the same time, I think in Western rock, there's a little bit too emphasis on the charisma and the passion of it. Where I'm like, that's all well and good, but the music's fucking garbage. So I don't care how like into it you are if this is boring.
Well, but the problem with Western music, and this is why I actually listen to a lot of Asian music, so I was kind of pleasantly surprised by your selection more than I was with the quality of the album, because I figured it would be good. But the problem I find in Western music nowadays is the pretentiousness. And and of course, I listen to the most pretentious music in the world. I think Talking Heads are probably the most pretentious band ever, but I love them. You know what I mean?
Oh yes.
But my favorite band from that era was B-52s. For that reason that they didn't take themselves too serious, and with Sambomaster, I find that it's real. It's real. He's in fact, Sambomaster reminds me of actually a Korean group called Hyuko, which is very, very similar. In fact, you might want to try listening to this, their last album is called 23, I think it is. It's got some jazz elements to it. It's got some hard edge to it. And the lead vocalist, his name is Oh Hyuk, is very, very passionate. He grew up in communist China, and he was, as a Korean growing up in communist China, it kind of gives you a chip on your shoulder, and it really comes out in his music. And he actually kind of again, I wish I could remember his name. The lead singer of Sambomaster reminded me a lot of him.
Mm-hmm.
Although although Hoyuk has a much more melodic, smooth voice. But it's spelled Hyukyo, and they're tremendous. So this reminded me of that. So it was really nice to have another quality Asian rock and roll album to my collection.
Great. Well,
and I will listen to more. And I actually saw some of their shows on YouTube, and they were kind of fun.
Oh yeah, they are Takashi Yamaguchi, their singer. He's just as ridiculous live as this album indicates.
Right.
I mean, he's stepping in place the whole time. He's like just screaming and hollering. He just goes on rants. He's
and well, that's what I'm talking about. Where you sell it. You get up there and you believe, and it's not like I'm trying to be cool, which is way.
It's called show business, kid.
Well, a lot of Western actors are really, a lot of Western musicians and a lot of Western frontmen are trying to be cool. It's all about I want to look how cool I am. That's just my own. Maybe it's my old, when I was a kid. Oh, we really cared. Whatever, but I find that. It's real, and I appreciate that. I really appreciate a real emotion.
Yeah, I definitely got that feeling from both this and Sugar. They have that X factor that seems to have been lost.
They actually sound like they're excited about the music they're about to play, rather than I am here on a chore, which is always a frustration.
Exactly. And you know who he kind of reminds me of? This is going to sound really strange. He kind of reminds me of Lowell George. He's kind of heavy set. And when you went to see Little Feat, and Little Feat is a totally different type of music. It's, kind of a southern rock / funk
boogie.
Band. Boogie. Yeah, boogie. That's a good word. You could not take your eyes off Lowell George. He just had this magnetism. So anyway, that's just that. So there's that.
Great. So how about we hit up the last one? Kris, walk us through. And so this is what I said in the beginning of the episode, that two of us took this sort of one way, and Kris, I almost feel like you interpreted this mission or this episode idea in a different way, because your album is so starkly different from ours. Like, ours are both kind of throwbacks to our youth that were albums that maybe we listened to in high school or middle school or college that were comforting to us, and this feels like something on a completely different wavelength.
Well, I have some news for you, because although this album came out in 2016, in my youth, I time traveled. Talk to the Head of Stone's Throw was like, hey, listen, I'm from the past. Let me take this back so I can listen to this. And deal done. That's how I discovered it. No, I came across this lovely little piece of music via an NPR article where they talked about, I think the headline was something like, hauntingly beautiful Latin American folk music or something.
I read that article.
Yes.
I read that article.
There you go. And so I was like,
that is my research.
That is beautifully NPR specific.
Yes. Hey, you gotta plug the little guys out there. You know what I'm saying? They're going to be gone pretty soon, and it's just going to be riff and rock. Giving you Ask Me Another and all those wonderful programs. But yeah, so like I don't, my listening is I like stuff that's very dense, very heavy, very chaotic and stuff. And this is the total opposite. This is all breathing room. It's like I'll use a metaphor that I love to use on this program, which is it's like getting a blowjob from a deity. It's just a beautiful experience. So I don't know, I would say that this falls into the same wavelength, even though it doesn't sonically, to the other albums. So I don't know. Maybe you want to expand upon that, Mr. Alex.
It was just, so we had these two sort of 90s alt-rock albums that were, I mean, I get the comfort of, when you explore really weird stuff, especially, Kris, that I listen to some pretty off-the-rails kind of music.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, like, hey, this is my little comfort album that I clutch onto when I want to listen to something a little bit tamer. And I got the same thing from Cotton, but then this is sort of like this... Boleros, Valses y Más.
We haven't even said the album title yet. That's a good point.
Frankie Reyes.
Yes.
And so it reminds me of that album we reviewed a few albums back. From that African artist that just had the one keyboard.
Mama Sane.
Yeah, reminded me a lot of that. And so it's very simplistic, just one keyboard. It reminded me, this is going to be a weird analogy, but having just finished Luke Cage, it reminded me of those scenes where Cottonmouth is playing on his Rhodes organ, just sitting there in his room. And so this album...
I don't watch Luke Cage, but it's interesting that I now know that there's a Rhodes organ that plays into screen time, which is pretty cool.
It is. It's the highlight of the show, really.
Sounds like
the music is top notch. The show is good, but the music's top notch. But so this is the kind of album I would put on a, not like when I'm having fun. It's just like rainy day. I put it on. I cuddle up under a blanket with a book, and like I just kind of get lost in it. And so I listened to this album, and I'm cracking up because I took a look and tried to find some reviews. I could only find one from Pitchfork, which gave it a 6.8.
Right.
And I was pretty shocked because this is going to be ballsy, and I've only listened to this, I've only heard this twice. I would call this pretty much a darn near perfect album. It is just it's pretty short. It's pretty succinct. It does one style of music, but it does really, really well, and it creates this sort of theme, this vibe, this environment where I'm like, I can put myself somewhere, and I'm like, this is just the perfect soundtrack to sort of like a rainy Saturday. And that, when an album could do that, that's really special. And just all these songs were just a real treat to listen to. They're all very mellow, they're very melodic, they're just soothing, and you kind of get washed away in it. And then all of a sudden it's over, and you're like, oh, holy shit, that was just the weirdest little adventure I just went on into Pleasantville.
Yeah, like here's another new subsection of Rick and Rock themes. I would call this perfect music to cook to.
Rick
I would
and
say
Rock?
this is fuck you. You have had several flubs this show I've not pointed out.
Never me.
But yeah, like this let the circle jerk me in. This is a perfect album. I don't know. I could listen to this at any time, and it would just instantly bring joy to me. Like it would instantly, totally wipe the table. This album is like bleach. It just cleans everything. Tony, what did you think?
Well, I'm glad I went third because I needed an explanation because when you say it's a perfect album, I guess that's right. It conjures a mood. My biggest feeling after listening to it, and I listened to it twice, my biggest feeling after listening to it is, I wonder what the originals sound like. It kind of made me wanting to know the source material. And I wonder if I might have enjoyed it more if that was the case. It's not like I didn't enjoy it. It's not something I would listen to there's active listening, and then there's passive listening. You know what I mean? You understand what I'm saying by that?
Right.
Yeah.
Where you put your headphones on and you jam to something, or you're listening to while you're driving, which is, I think, active listening because you're not doing anything else but driving and listening. But this would be something like you said, great cooking music. It conjures I swear to God, it reminded me of fairgrounds. It reminded me of a mall.
Like circus music.
I wouldn't say so much circus music because it's, but yeah, kinda.
Like a merry-go-round. I know exactly what you're talking about. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, right. Carnival music. Like I when I was listening to this, I could hear like the
laughter of children.
Right, exactly. Just like this, like I watch movies with the captions on, because I have, I sometimes I'm listening to music while I watch movies, but I don't have very good hearing, and there's an indistinct talking. I forget how to say it, but there's like this sort of I could see listening to this while I was cooking. See, that's a good analogy, or not a good analogy. That's it's an old synthesizer,
an Oberheim.
And I just I thought a lot of the songs sound the same. The one I liked the most was the last one. The last one had some real was more dynamic and a little lengthier. And I wish I could remember the name of it.
La Comprasa. The Compromise.
I did. I really enjoyed that one. But I think it's a fascinating record, and certainly it's a really good passive album. And I didn't mean that in the best sense. Remember Brian Eno used to make music, ambient music. That's what this is.
Right, and I was reminded of that in a way that, like, because exactly, I love old Eno soundscapes. Music for Airports is a favorite album, despite it being 45 minutes of absolutely nothing happening.
That might be something that all three of us agree on.
But so like this
I was one of those Eno is God people.
I'm not, because then he went into the 80s and fucked everything for future music to come, and then he made Coldplay happen so he can choke on a bag of dicks.
He did. I forgot about that. No, Brian, why?
The great Lord Eno giveth and taketh away.
No.
Well, he did the soundtrack to Me and Earl and the Dying Girl, which won the Sundance Film Festival, and it was magic. So, this scratched a similar itch. It's like in a sense of passive listening, but again, it just, for me, it paints a texture. There's a textureness to this album, and you mentioned, hey, my favorite song is La Comparsa. You could play any of these songs. I couldn't tell you which one is what. It's unless I'm like right.
But I'm okay with that. And there's plenty of music that I listen to that has a similar sound where I'm like, it's just kind of a wash in the background, and I don't know which track is which, and it doesn't matter to me, because this is the type of album where I'm not cherry picking stuff and putting it on the mix to give to my girl, like, hey, I made you a new mix CD. It's I do that sometimes. It's like
I was just imagining you making a CD of this.
Yeah,
just be like, hey girl, you want some Valses y más?
Exactly. This is
this. I could absolutely fuck to this music.
Oh no, this is like Kris said, cooking music. I listen to Rainy Day. I'm like, this is totally like bring that Tinder date home music as well.
Cooking up that tang.
I wouldn't.
Totally.
But like,
the sound of the carnival, sound of the firecrackers.
This is an album like you play in whole. It's a whole album. Like, there are tracks, but really it's just one piece. Like, where that the Bob Mould album, the Sambomaster album, are a collection of songs. This is one cohesive kind of chunk of stuff that gets broken up into 12 separate pieces, but it's really one whole, like a pie. It's not it's not like an old country buffet where you grab a little bit of everything. It's one fucking pie.
I was reading the Pitchfork interview too, because I wanted to see what they had to say about it, and they do bring to light, like, the one issue that is all of us seem to have with this album is that every track sounds the same, but it's 25 minutes, so it's like you barely, like, how can you complain about it at that point? And it's just so nicely executed. At the same time that it gets like a very easy pass on being in the same sonic zone the whole time.
Because for 25 minutes it doesn't matter. Like, if this was an hour record, you'd be like, oh my god, this is a slog. But
I would like it less. I would still love it, but I would definitely like it less.
But at 25 minutes it worked. So the other thing I was thinking of too as we're talking about it, there's a scene in the second season of Master of None, where Aziz Ansari, being New York hipster, he goes to this party, and they're like, oh my god, coincidentally John Legend's here, now he's going to play on the piano for us. Because New York is always the greatest place in the universe, allegedly. But I'd rather Frankie Reyes showed up to that party. He's like, hey guys, I'm just going to jam out on my organ. I'd be like, I'm going to stay at this party for fucking ever. You're going to have to drag me out.
You know what? That's a great. I totally see that.
I'm just going to sit and drink some. I'm going to drink some mojitos and listen to this guy fucking just do whatever he wants.
Yeah, we should bring this record to Anejo, because my God, this would make my lunch so much better. I could not. I will say this though. I find if I was listening to this, if I was listening to this in my car, listening to it actively, it might be a little too tedious.
Yes.
But if I was doing something else, this would be a perfect record.
So this is a good segue then into talking about the production of this album, which. Like you say, it would be good at this upper class Mexican restaurant, but like the one reason why I couldn't pull this out at like a party, or like honestly even in a cooking situation because of all the ambient noise, but like it's mixed very low. It's very subtle. Dare I use lowercase as an adjective descriptor here? Yes, that is a genre of music, people. So, but like, it's interesting because it makes me like, I understand, and I myself even, when not scrutinizing, would label this as a passive listening experience, but like, I really like listening to it in an active way, like really like turning it up loud and, really diving in, listening to the texture changes and shit like that, because it's such a lower range album. Like, I can't think of very many albums that are mixed, in this way, where it's all lower range tones, you know what I mean? There's like, it barely touches mid-range frequencies.
That's true. That's very true.
When it hits those moments, and so it's such an interesting active listen for me, because of the way that it's mixed like that.
It is actively understated.
Yes. Actively under. Ooh, I like that. I was going to bring back. What was it that you said before in the world music episode? Was it Raw Innocence?
Yes. Raw.
I would say this also has Pornhub's Raw Innocence on it as well.
This is less that I'm blanking on that album that we reviewed.
Amesane, La Musique du Niger.
Yeah, that one had a roughness, a sloppiness to it, because it was a guy doing 2 takes and that's all he could do.
Yes.
That, like, I think there were active mistakes in that recording. This one is definitely a little bit more polished. I don't get so much of a raw innocence to it as just like it's deliberately chill. It's deliberately low key.
Excuse me, a crystalline innocence.
Yes, fair enough.
There we go.
And
it's like a diamond ring. You know what I mean?
Pristine.
It's like a rock.
Right.
Yes.
And so this kind of music has a specific place and time for it. It's like, obviously you're not gonna, like, if you go to the club, they're not gonna drop Frankie Reyes on the turntable and be like, all right, get down to this. Like that's not gonna happen. But like,
I want to live in that world.
Oh, I do too. Jesus Christ, I want to live in that world so bad.
Grinding with some drunk chick to Que Sabes Tu or Aquel Señor. Oh man,
we can work on the music video.
Dios mío. They actually have a music video for this song, which is one of the songs on here, which is one of the best music videos I've ever seen. They do it like a karaoke video, so it's like all B-roll of like Mexico City with like the lyrics to the song that are being sung coming up, karaoke style. It's fucking brilliant. I love it.
Amazing.
It is.
Which again makes me think I really want to hear the originals. This is going to show you how old I am. It gave me a Walter Wanderley vibe, and I don't know if you're familiar with Walter Wanderley, but he was one of my first guilty pleasures, a la Carpenters. He was this organ player from the 60s and 70s, and
I haven't heard of this guy.
Oh my god, he's got an aggressive turtleneck going on Google.
Ooh,
oh yeah, good.
I'm into it. I wish I could be a guy that rocked a turtleneck. That's one of the things.
Summer Samba was one of my favorite songs that I could never admit that I loved, but I absolutely loved it. So
a Brazilian
until I worked for a
organist.
radio. Oh, he's amazing. Yeah, but anyway.
Yeah, this sounds great. I'm gonna have to check it out.
But I would highly recommend this album. Again, like Kris mentioned, it's 25 minutes, so it's a low investment, but I think there's a high return on that investment. Like, go cuddle up on your couch, go open up your favorite book or porno mag or whatever you want to
go to the club. Grind with your lady.
Or grind with your lady to this beautiful little album, and it's such a wonderful little, just a nice short little treat. Like if you go to one of them fancy restaurants and the portions this tiny, it's just a spoon of like all your favorite things in one. That's what it's like. It's just a little spoonful, and you're like, it's amazing, and then it's gone. It's over. You gotta wait for the next course.
I cannot recommend this album highly enough. It's just like, it's one of those albums where like you come across it and it's like, you're fucking Wile E. Coyote and Roadrunner just dropped an anvil on your head. It's like, oh wow, this is a thing that exists.
As we're wrapping up, anything you two need to promote that you got going in the pipeline?
I got this fan edit of Last Jedi that once I figure out how to distribute it on the internet without endangering the House of Mouse, I'm gonna do it. Because hey, if Topher Grace can do it, so can I.
Wait, did you actually make this, or did you just find it?
I made it.
I'm really curious because, well, you know how I feel about Last Jedi.
I cut out 40 minutes, and I'm waiting for the DVD to come out to see if there are any good deleted scenes. Apparently, there's one where it's during the Falthier chase, and I'm sorry that you haven't seen this, Tony, so you'll be totally out to dry here. But during the Falthier chase, they were originally going to go through a bathhouse with like a bunch of naked, steamy, sweaty aliens, and that was going to be a scene in the movie. And now we'll be able to see it in all its smoking hot shittiness. Naked aliens, people.
I mean, Jabba was naked.
He was, but he wasn't like getting like a steam
Was
bath.
he though? I think he had a little Speedo thong on underneath all those flaps.
Salacious Crumb is his clothing.
It's his little codpiece.
Yes.
Yeah, it was like a silver lame thing, but nobody really noticed it.
Cotton, you got anything to promote? That
Honestly, no. My K-pop blog is on hiatus, although that's going to change because I have this tongue-in-cheek K-pop blog called kpapa.com, and I ironically used to stan K-pop, and now I just stan it. So I guess I can't, which is funny too because I grew up sort of a tastemaker at a trendy radio station that I worked at for years and years and years, where I used to actually play stuff like Bob Mould and the Smithereens and Suzanne Vega and all this other stuff, and The Cure and
Lou Vega.
Oh, I'm trying to throw out names, but Miles Davis. I used to play Miles Davis on my freaking morning show, so it was something that struck me as I'm probably the only person in my 50s that actually really is fascinated by that type of genre. So I went for it.
I mean, I give you credit. The only K-pop artist besides Psy, of course, is Lee Jung Hyun.
He's a buffoon. Yeah.
Well, yeah, but I've.
But he's a gentleman.
He is, but I've heard of Lee Jung Hyun, and that's as far as my K-pop knowledge goes.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. Yeah.
But,
there's three groups that I would recommend to anybody, and that's EXID, who are kind of hip hop, and Red Velvet. I love because they're cute and cuddly, but every single track on their albums is a freaking gem in terms of how it's composed, and they really, really go for it. That's about it for me right now. That's about all I listen to.
there's another. I've heard of a guy named Roy Kim. That's as far as my K-pop has gone.
No, it's generally. I wouldn't. To be honest, I wouldn't recommend it to anybody because it's like. So honestly, it's just my thing. It's like some people like tropical fish. Some people like. I like to watch K-pop and write about it. So it's very tongue in cheek, but. And it's great. It's kind of like it's passive music because you listen to it while you're working or whatever. Anyway, so yeah. Well, thanks.
Yeah, thanks for joining, and tune in next time, folks, when we do something else equally as stupid and off the rails. And
the next episode, I will say, is going to be harebrained. I will 100% sign off on that.